Hello everyone! At the end of every year, I've been creating some kind of Sonic the Hedgehog animation. Normally I'll take a clip from one of the Sonic Twitter takeovers, as that helps me with animating character acting and lip sync. However, this year I had been watching the anime Mob Psycho 100, which is a really good anime. Mob is a very relatable character. What inspired me the most about this anime was not only the rougher art style, which is very appealing to look at, but it was the use of impact frames during fight scenes. And watching this anime made me really want to experiment with animating impact frames. As well as this, I also wanted to experiment with animating in Blender Grease Pencil. Blender is mainly known for being a 3D modeling and animation software. However, it does actually have a 2D animation software built into the program, which I've been using for nearly 2 years to make 2D puppet rigs. As I feel like Blender has a lot of tools that can help you with speeding up the flow of animations, which I'll get into later on. Before any animation is created, it needs to be storyboarded, which is the process of drawing loose sketches to help you get a rough idea of your animation down. For storyboarding, I like to use Krita, which is another software I'll be using during this project. For the storyboard, I wanted us to see the Chaos Emeralds on the ground as they levitate and spin around Sonic. As this happens, the camera pans up, as Sonic reaches then grabs the Chaos Emeralds. Next, there'll be a couple of impact frames of the Chaos Emerald colours as it transitions into Sonic's eye. We zoom out, seeing Sonic's fur and eyes change colour into his super form. We then have an establishing shot of Sonic pointing, which was very much inspired by Super Sonic 2 and Sonic Frontiers. Once the foundation was down, some people like to create a cleaner sketch of the character movement, but I just wanted to move on to drawing out the keyframes in Blender Grease Pencil. As I mentioned before, I normally use this software to create 2D puppet rigs, which does require a lot of drawing, animating, patience, and my sanity. However, I haven't used Blender to animate mini projects to this extent. But what I like about animating in Blender is due to everything you draw in the program being made up of vectors, which, in simple terms, the line you draw can be scaled or distorted to whatever size you want and it will never lose quality, which is great for crisp line art. A reason why this is great is that I can use Blender's sculpt tools to create subtle movements quickly, and the lines maintain their quality. At the time of animating this, I was still recovering from burnout, so progress on this was very slow. Like, I think animating the line art took a week on and off, as I would occasionally find the motivation to sit at my computer a little bit. But again, progress was very slow. As you can probably see in this time-lapse, I have divided Sonic up into a few different layers. His body, arm hidden behind him, his front arm, and his head. This is so I can easily move these parts around, or redraw them if I need to, without causing interference with the entire drawing as Sonic, as this makes it very easy for cleanup. Speaking of cleanup, did you know that Blender has a very similar tool as the vector eraser seen in Club Studio Paint? I found this out not long before animating this project by complete accident. Although for some reason it wouldn't work properly with some of the separate layers such as the head and the body, which was a little strange, so I had to manually erase some of the overlapping lines. Anyways, there's a small feature in Blender Grease Pencil that I use to speed up in-betweens, especially if it's very simple, like I move Sonic's hand here and then I sculpt it down there. When you look into the lines here, you can see it's made up of many vertices, instead of manually having to sculpt down every frame, which can work, but it might look a little odd. I can tell Blender to take these vertices and fill in the gaps, and Blender calculates these vertices and does just that. While it's a neat feature, it's only really good for very simple tasks like this, as if the amount of vertices are different between frame A and frame B, for an example you draw 2 different poses, it will do this. Not to mention, it's very stiff as each frame of the vertices is calculated to transition from the start and end keyframes. Now that I think about it, it's basically the equivalent of tweening in any animation program, except instead of the layer that you're tweening, it's the vertices on that layer? Does that make sense? I only use this feature sparingly, mainly for easing in some animation frames here and there. I also use it in rigging to help with a more consistent animation turnaround of a face shape for an example, which also involves a lot of cleanup. So yeah, if you want to use this feature, use it sparingly, as while it's a great time saver for little things, it definitely has its downsides. For this scene of the close-up of Sonic, His hand is in the foreground, and I wanted to add some thicker lines to show depth, which can be done with the thickness brush in the sculpt section of Blender, which can thicken or thin out lines very easily. After many hours of drawing line art, I was onto the cleanup stage, where I just erase overlapping lines, like how you can see Sonic's body and back quill for his head, which I used Blender's equivalent of the Clip Studio Paint Vector Eraser, and some manual erasing. And finally, the line art of Sonic's animation was finished. Now, since this animation was about Sonic transforming into Super Sonic, the Chaos Emeralds are pretty darn important. So, since I was already in Blender, and I have a small amount of 3D modeling experience, I wanted to 3D model the Chaos Emeralds, which sounds like a lot of work, but all I did was import a cone with a low polygon count to give it that pointy emerald look, took the flat top of the cone and extruded it, UV unwrap it, organize the UV islands, duplicate that emerald 6 times, go into Krita to start texture painting, using the UV islands I exported. A question I got asked was, how were the reflections in the Chaos Emeralds done? And you may be thinking I did some wacky, super technical lighting in Blender to give the Chaos Emeralds that emerald lighting and reflection, but truth be told, I painted it in Krita. There was a point during this where I took the diamond pattern built into Krita to add some texture, but other than that, this was all digitally painted. I then changed the colour of the textures to match each emerald, and bam, there's the Chaos Emeralds. These took me like less than an hour. And it was making these emeralds that I started to get inspired again. I think I was finally getting out the line art zone and doing something a little different for once. Anyways, I was also trying to figure out how I was going to animate the 7 Chaos Emeralds flying around Sonic, as Sonic is a flat image in a 3D space, and the emeralds are well 3-dimensional. So using the Sonic that I animated in Blender, I added in a camera to match the storyboards. I gathered the Chaos Emeralds, and instead of having to move them around the scene manually, I parented them to this empty circle object, which cannot be seen in the final render. And once this empty object is moved or rotated, the emeralds follow it. Using my storyboards as reference, I animated the Chaos Emeralds spinning around Sonic. The tricky part was when they were all merging into one, as I needed them to be small enough to fit into Sonic's hand when he grabs them. However, once the animation was complete with Sonic and the emeralds, I exported them separately into a PNG sequence and imported all of the frames into Krita so I can add some colour. Colouring Sonic was very easy for the most part, although originally he was going to have these shines on his shoes, but tracking them was difficult due to the camera movement that I made in Blender, which definitely did not cause me any trouble, and I definitely should not have left until the editing phase. Once Sonic was coloured, I used his silhouette to erase the Chaos Emeralds spinning behind him for every frame, which was a lot of work, but not as much work as the lighting. Oh, the lighting, where do I begin? I was inspired by Sonic Unleashed Super Sonic transformation, and I liked how the lighting was on the rim of Sonic, so I thought it would be cool to animate every colour of the Chaos Emeralds onto him. But that got a little messy. After taking a step away for an evening, trying to figure out how to animate this lighting, I decided to simplify it and just focus on the light and the dark, then see where that took me. However, for the breakdown for how I got to this shading colour is a little complicated, so bear with me while I explain how I got to this lighting effect. So I was gonna write in the script how I came to the final lighting for this animation. It's kind of complicated to write down in script form, so I'm literally just gonna show you how I've got this all set up here. So first I put down a purple overlay layer. You can see here, it makes them purple. Pretty cool. I also add like an extra like lighting up top. It's just a gradient. You can kind of see there. Then I add a group layer where when I turn it on, it's just a shadow layer. So this is like set to linear burn. I don't know if this actually does anything. I know it doesn't really do anything. So I've just got like a dark blue gradient. So I've got that clipped over Sonic and another group layer. And I've also got this group layer set to multiply. Then I've just drawn like a cyan kind of colored lighting here. It looks like it's a whole bunch of different colors, but like it's literally just the same color, I think. If I can get this to show. Yeah, it's literally just the same cyan color. It looks a little chaotic. In this cyan lighting layer, as you can see here, I've got a layer style, and literally this is just a stroke that I've added onto the lighting, and it's like this peach kind of color. You can kind of see how it's got this outline here, and that's how I create this like outline effect. So that is basically how I added in this lighting. It's very complicated. I don't know how I figured this out. I just kind of went with the flow and I was like, oh, what if I try this and try that? And eventually I just came to this. It works with the animation, I think. Also, to get that multicolored glow of the emeralds on Sonic, I used a soft brush to paint this out, which I tweened the rotation and clipped it to Sonic. I also set the layer to addition to make it extra glowy. I added in some highlights to Sonic's eyes, and we are finished the first scene of this animation. Moving on, I forgot to record animating the impact frames. To be fair, the time-lapse probably wouldn't have been very fun to look at, but to break it down as someone who doesn't animate impact frames like ever, I used the vanishing point tool in Krita, placed the point where Sonic's fist is from the first shot, then I drew in lines in different colours, trying to include a bit of the shape of Sonic's silhouette as well. Then I drew the inverse of this with a black brush. Then I turned the background black and drew some lines in white. I then animated this swirl effect, which was a lot of fun. And then I cut again to black, and I roughly drew out Sonic's eye in scene 2, before cutting to his eye with the colour variation. Then scene 2 continues on as normal. Speaking of scene 2, it was pretty simple to colour. Well, until he turns golden yellow, because Sonic's quills and ears are moving in the wind, it was tricky to keep the colour change consistent. However, after much trial and error, I got there. And on a separate layer, I coloured Sonic in yellow. Why on a separate layer, you ask? So I can add some gradients and lighting effects onto only this part of Sonic. Sonic's eyes also changed from green to brown in this shot, which with some colour separation lines was very simple to animate. I also drew in some more colour separation lines for the cell shading, as this was a close-up and I wanted to have more detail. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Sonic himself and his pointing hand were both exported from Blender in separate layers, as I wanted to add some darker lighting effects, as well as some rim lighting onto only the hand, which will make Sonic stand out. Once this was exported from Krita, I felt like this scene didn't look as cool as I wanted it to be. However, this scene will look much better in post. Also, there is scene 3, which I forgot to record, but really it's just a quick looping animation. The only notable thing to mention was for his aura effect, I made this in Blender, with this wave distortion effect. I also painted the backgrounds in Krita as well, although looking back I wish I added a little bit more detail or texture to the background on shot 3, especially since it's an establishing shot. For editing, I used DaVinci Resolve 18, and to make my animations pop out, I like to use the light rays and glow effects to add a lot more interesting lighting, as I feel like it really brings it all together. You just have to be careful to not overuse these effects, as it will wash out your lovely drawings if it's a little intense, and your computer might hate you. After some minor editing tweaks and some sound design, this animation project is finally complete. And I'm very happy with the results of this one. While I didn't use Blender Grease Pencil for everything, I felt like every software has its strengths, and Blender is very good for drawing line art and animating camera movement, and of course is great for creating 3D models. This project was a great learning experience, and while there were times I really struggled and went through much trial and error, mainly on the first shot, but I'm glad I pulled through and finished the project. The link to this animation is down below if you'd like to check it out. Until next time.